Your team isn't just a group of people, it's an ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, it needs the right balance to thrive. Introducing Cultivating a Rainforest Team Culture, an immersive one-day leadership training inspired by Jason Kay's best-selling book, Journey to a Rainforest Team Culture. Learn how to build a team's culture that's resilient, innovative, and unstoppable. You'll leave with clear leadership frameworks, actionable strategies, and the tools to foster motivation, engagement, and problem solving. Join us and transform your office into a thriving rainforest where your team can grow like never before. Register now at www.jasonk.com. That's www.jasonkae.com.
Welcome to another episode of the Multifamily Collective. Let's talk about tempering metal today. So there's this process when you temper metal. In other words, you turn metal into steel products that you can use to build or construct things. There's a process that you have to put metal through in order to make it strong enough, or you have to create integrity within the steel in order for the steel to be function well out in the environment, no matter what you might be building. And that process is in part heat and in part cooling, and doing that repetitively until you get the metal to a point where it is tempered, it is strong, and it is full of integrity. And so the process is you heat metal up to a very high temperature, and then you cool it off. But when you do that, the metal is brittle. So you have to heat it up again, not quite extreme the second time around, and then you cool it down again, and then you heat it up, not quite as extreme as the second time, and then cool it off. And this is sort of tempering the metal to a point where you have good integrity, you have good strength. And then you can turn that into products that you can put out into the marketplace to build on, so that you have buildings that don't fall down, or cars that don't fall apart when they're driving down the road, or so on and so forth. And it's, in my head, it's a good metaphor for building a team. It's a good metaphor for helping mentor and shape someone into a better human being, or a beneficial presence to others, beneficial presence to themselves. And it's a sort of a tempering concept or principle that you put a team through, or you put people through. I recall this story. I was in Houston visiting properties, and I left Houston to drive to San Antonio so that I could get there, get in bed, and wake up the next day and do property visits in San Antonio before flying back to St. Louis or Atlanta or wherever I was living at the time. And I was probably, let's say I was 100 miles into my trip between Houston and San Antonio when I get a call on the phone that says, there's a fire at one of our communities. Several units are on fire, and I need you to turn your car around and drive back to Houston. So I got off the phone and I called the property manager, the regional manager, and a regional director and construction manager for people in Houston. And they had all already responded to the fire. They gave me a rundown of, calling out to the various support agencies that could support them and the residents as the fire was being extinguished by the fire department. So we had set up that sort of resource for people to get displaced into other places, fed for the evening, so on and so forth. Talked with another person who had said, hey, look, we've already decided where we can move people into other apartments in the community. Here's our plan. We'll just play it out over the course of the rest of this evening and tomorrow. We have a couple of units that were staged for a presentation, and we can displace a couple of people in there that don't have places to go. And then the construction manager and the regional maintenance supervisor had already fired up a plan to get the building secure, fencing around the buildings so that people were not going in and out of the area. So everything had already been executed, or at least started to be executed. And I got a phone and I called the person back who would give me the direction to turn the car around and go back to Houston. I said, I'm not going back to Houston. Here's an update with regard to everything that's been done. I'm very confident in the leadership there that is handling the situation. And I'm very confident in the triage that is happening. I'm very confident that even though they have not been through a big fire like this in the past, they know what they're doing and they're doing it. And if they need anybody, they can call me and I can certainly turn the car around. But if they don't, I would like for them to run through this exercise. So didn't go back. The next day, or later on that evening, I checked in with everybody just to make sure they were okay. The following morning, I check in, a little bit of an update. throughout the course of the day while I was in San Antonio. I was getting updates from Houston. And that was a form of tempering that particular team as it related to responding to a crisis, right? They got heated up and they, metaphorically speaking, heated up. They did what they knew to do in that particular situation because they've been trained very well. They understood crisis management. They understood all the things, all the protocols necessary to get everything secured and put in place and people displaced into other areas or other apartments or other living arrangements. And they cooled off, right? So that the next time a fire comes around, they're even more well-versed, and hopefully, God forbid it doesn't or didn't, they were at least more versed in the art of taking care of that or triaging that. And the same principles applied to that particular crisis could apply to other crises, right? So something else happens that maybe it's not a fire, maybe it's a flood, maybe it's some other sort of thing that happens on a property. They're versed because they went through this thing by themselves. They didn't have somebody standing there giving them the direction. They came together collectively and somebody identified themselves as the leader that particular evening, and they triaged everything and everything came out as good as it can come out in a fire circumstance. So temper steel as a metaphor or analogy for tempering your team. Allow them to get into circumstances where they are pushed, where their boundaries are pushed, where their limits are pushed. Be there as a support, be there in the background, but don't be there directing, pointing fingers and telling them what to do because you're not really teaching them or training them or helping them get that rep and becoming adept at handling crisis. That's it for today. Take care. We'll talk to you again soon.